I came home to find my life's work locked away. My daughter-in-law stood there pregnant and smug, telling me my workshop was now her nursery. She thought because I was 70 years old that I was weak. She thought because I drove an old truck that I was poor. She was about to find out that you never ever lock a master carpenter out of his own building, especially when he owns the deed to the land you are standing on. Before I tell you how I declared war on my own family, please hit that like button if you believe elders deserve respect in their own homes. Subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the rest of this story. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from tonight? It does a lonely old man good to know he is being heard. My name is Garrett Stone. I am 70 years old, and I have spent 50 of those years building houses in the rainy suburbs of Seattle. I know every neighborhood, every zoning law, and exactly how much weight a load-bearing wall can take before it snaps. But nothing prepared me for the snap I felt inside my chest last Tuesday. I'd been gone for 2 weeks, driving my beat-up RV down the coast to visit my wife Martha's grave in Oregon. It was a trip I took every year to clear my head and talk to her about the state of the world. Driving back into Seattle, the rain was coming down in sheets, that cold gray wash that soaks right into your bones. All I wanted was to park the rig, pour a black coffee, and head out to my workshop. That shop is my sanctuary. It is a detached garage I built with my own hands 40 years ago. It stands separate from the main house, solid and reliable. It smells of cedar and sawdust and peace. It is where I go when the world gets too loud. But when I pulled my truck into the driveway, my headlights caught something shiny on the workshop door. I blinked, wiping my tired eyes. It was a padlock, not just any lock, but one of those high-tech digital ones with a glowing keypad. I sat there in my truck, the wipers slapping back and forth, staring at that piece of metal. I never locked that shop, never. My neighbors knew they could borrow a tool whenever they needed. I stepped out into the rain. My boots crunched on the gravel. I walked up to the door and rattled the handle locked tight. I felt a surge of heat rise up my neck, hotter than any furnace. I hammered my fist against the wood. "Open up!" I yelled. The sound was swallowed by the rain. That is when the back door of the main house opened. Brittany, my daughter-in-law, stepped onto the porch. She was under the awning, dry and comfortable. She was holding one of those green smoothies she is always drinking, rubbing her belly with her free hand. She is 5 months pregnant with my first grandchild, and she uses that baby like a shield and a weapon all at once. "Oh, you are back early," she said. Her voice was casual, like we were discussing the weather, not why she had barricaded my property. She took a sip of her drink. I pointed a shaking finger at the lock. "What is this, Brittany? Why is there a code on my door?" She shrugged, adjusting her expensive cardigan. "We changed it. Garrett, Toby and I decided it was time. That place is full of toxic dust and sharp blades. It is a death trap. We are turning it into the nursery. The nursery." My blood went cold. She was talking about my workshop. Inside those walls sat $80,000 worth of precision machinery. My Powermatic table saw that weighed 500 lb. My Festal collection that I had spent decades acquiring. Hand planes that had belonged to my father. Those were not hobbies. They were my legacy. They were the tools that paid for the house she was standing in. And she was talking about them like they were garbage in a dumpster. "Open it," I growled. Now Brittany sighed, rolling her eyes like she was dealing with a toddler having a tantrum. "Dad, listen to me. We hired a cleaning crew. It is already done. We need the space for the baby. You do not need all that junk anymore. You are retired. Your hands shake. It is dangerous junk," she called. 40 years of mastery junk. I started walking toward the porch, disregarding the rain, soaking through my flannel shirt. That is when my son Toby came running out. He looked pale, thinner than the last time I saw him. He was wearing that nervous smile he always had when he was trying to sell a bad deal in his real estate job. Dad. Hey, Dad. Hold on. Toby stammered, stepping in front of his wife. Let's just go inside and have some tea. It is freezing out here. We can talk about this calmly. I stopped and looked my son in the eye. I remembered the day he married Brittany. I paid off his student loans as a wedding gift, $60,000. I let them live in the upstairs of my house rentrée so they could save money to buy their own place. I gave him everything I never had. And this is how he repays me. By locking me out of my own life while I am visiting his mother's grave. I am not drinking tea, Toby. I said, my voice low and dangerous. I am going into my workshop. Give me the code. Toby looked at Brittany, his eyes pleading for permission. She just shook her head, crossing her arms over her chest. No, Toby. We discussed this. He is not going in there. It is for the safety of the family. He needs to let go of the past. I looked at them. Really looked at them. I saw the contempt in Brittany's eyes. She did not see a man who built this estate. She saw a dusty old relic that was taking up space. And I saw the weakness in Toby's spine. He wouldn't stand up for me. He wouldn't even stand up for himself. They thought because I was 70, I was finished. They thought they could just take what was mine because I was too old to fight back. They were wrong. I did not say another word. I turned my back on them and walked to the back of my RV. The rain was coming down harder now, mixing with the rage in my veins. I opened the exterior storage compartment and pulled out my heavy-duty bolt cutters. The steel felt cold and heavy in my hands. Good, solid steel. The kind that doesn't lie to you. I walked back to the workshop door. The rain was dripping off the brim of my hat. I clamped the jaws of the cutter around the shank of their fancy digital lock. Dad, wait. What are you doing? Toby yelled, panic finally rising in his voice. He started running down the stairs. I looked over my shoulder. The muscles in my forearms tightened as I squeezed the handles. 1, I said, you open this door. 2, I cut it open. And if I have to cut it, I am not stopping at the lock. I will take this door off its hinges if I have to. Brittany screamed from the porch. You are insane. That lock cost $200. I squeezed the handles. There was a loud pop that sounded like a gunshot. The lock snapped and fell onto the wet concrete. I kicked the door open and stepped into the darkness, flipping the light switch. What I saw inside made my knees buckle. And that is when the real war began. I stepped across the threshold and felt the blood drain from my face. The light from the single overhead bulb that I had flipped on flickered for a second before humming to life, illuminating a scene that made me physically ill. My workshop, the sanctuary I had built beam by beam 4 decades ago, was gone. I do not mean it was messy. I do not mean it was rearranged. I mean it was gutted. It was a hollow shell. The 800 square FT of space that had once been packed with the finest woodworking machinery money could buy was now nothing but cold gray concrete and empty drywall. The silence in the room was heavy, oppressive, like the air inside a tomb. I walked forward slowly, my boots scuffing against the floor. The sound echoed. It never used to echo. It used to be absorbed by stacks of lumber, by bags of sawdust, by the solid mass of iron and steel that anchored my life. Now there was nothing to catch the sound. I stopped in the center of the room and looked down. There on the concrete slab were 4 distinct rust-cold squares. They outlined the footprint of my Powermatic table saw. That machine weighed over 500 lb. It was a cast iron beast that I had bought in 1995. I had saved for 3 years to buy that saw. It was the heart of this shop. I had cut the timber for the addition on the main house with that saw. I had built the crib Toby slept in with that saw. Now all that was left of it were 4 stains on the floor and a phantom outline in the dust. I turned to the north wall. For 30 years, a custom-built French cleat system had hung there. It held my collection of hand tools, my L. Nealon block planes, my Japanese pull saws, and most importantly, the set of Sheffield steel chisels that had belonged to my father. He had given them to me when I started my apprenticeship. They were polished to a mirror finish, their handles worn smooth by the sweat of 2 generations of stonemen. The wall was bare. They had ripped the cleats right out of the studs. The drywall was torn where they had been careless, leaving jagged white scars against the painted wood. It wasn't just that the tools were gone, it was the violence of their removal. It looked like the room had been stripped by locusts. I felt a trembling start in my hands, not from age but from a rage so pure and white-hot that I was afraid I might black out. I turned around slowly. Brittany was standing in the doorway, hovering just outside the rain, holding her green smoothie like a shield. Toby was behind her, looking at his shoes. "Where is it?" I asked. My voice was barely a whisper, but in that empty acoustic chamber, it sounded like a thunderclap. "Where is my life?" Brittany took a sip of her drink and shrugged as if we were discussing a missing pair of socks. "I told you, Garrett, we got rid of it. We sold it. It was just old junk collecting dust. You have not used half of those machines in years. We cleared it out to make room for the nursery. Look at all this space. Once we put down some hardwood flooring and paint these walls a nice, calming sage green, it will be perfect for the baby. Maybe a yoga corner for me in the back." I stared at her. She honestly believed what she was saying. She looked at a cabinet saw that could slice through 3 in oak like it was butter and saw a piece of scrap metal. She looked at hand tools that were worth more than her car and saw old junk. "You sold it," I repeated, taking a step toward them. "You sold my shop?" "Yes," she said, sounding annoyed that she had to explain this again. "And honestly, you should be thanking us. It was a hassle. We had to hire a guy with a truck to haul it all away, but we managed to get $5,000 for the whole lot. That is going to cover the painting and the new crib. We're putting the money right back into the house, so really it is a win-win." $5,000, the number hung in the damp air. I felt like someone had punched me in the gut. $5,000. The festool sanders alone cost $4,000. The table saw was worth $5,000. The jointer, the planer the band saw, the dust collection system, the hand tools, my father's chisels. I did the math in my head instantly, the way a contractor does when he is estimating a job. There was easily $80,000 worth of equipment in this room, $80,000 of assets that I had curated, maintained, and oiled for 40 years, and she had traded it all for $5,000 and a coat of sage green paint. It was not just theft. It was an insult. It was a declaration that my life, my work, my passion was worth pennies on the dollar to them. They had liquidated my legacy for the price of a used sedan. I looked at Toby, my son, the boy I had taught to hold a hammer before he could write his name. He knew. He had to know. He knew how much that equipment cost. He knew that you could not buy a vintage Stanley plane for $5 at a yard sale. "Toby," I said. I did not yell. I spoke his name like a judge passing a sentence. "You let her sell my shop for $5,000. Toby finally looked up, but his eyes skittered away from mine, fixing on a water stain on the ceiling. "Dad, look. It is done. Okay, we needed the cash. The baby is coming. Expenses are adding up. Brittany wanted the space. And we thought since you were gone, it was a good time to transition. You are 70, Dad. You should be relaxing, not breathing in sawdust. Relaxing. Transition. Corporate words. Salesman words. He was trying to sell me on my own obsolescence. You are telling me," I said, my voice rising, that you took $80,000 of industrial machinery and sold it for $5,000. You are telling me you are that stupid. Is that what you are telling me, son? That you are a fool? Brittany bristled. Hey, do not talk to him like that. We got a good deal. The guy said most of that stuff was outdated anyway. No safety stops old motors. He did us a favor taking it off our hands. The guy. I looked back at the empty floor. I looked at the scratches near the door where they had dragged the heavy cast iron bases across the concrete. A professional rigger would not have dragged them. A professional would have used a pallet jack. Whoever took my tools did not care about them. They just wanted them gone fast. And then I looked at Toby again. He was sweating. It was 50-degree and raining, and there was a line of sweat running down his temple. He was wringing his hands, a nervous tic he had had since he was a teenager, lying about his report card. $5,000 did not make sense. Even a fence selling stolen goods would have given them 10 or 15. 5,000 was desperate. 5,000 was the kind of money you take when you need cash today, this hour, this minute. And Toby knew the value. He knew if he had actually sold them even on Craigslist, he could have gotten 50,000 in a week. Something was wrong. The air in the empty shop shifted. It was no longer just about disrespect. It was about desperation. Who did you sell it to? I asked. Toby flinched. Just a guy, a liquidator. What was his name? I asked, taking another step forward. I want his name and I want his number, because I am so going to call the police and report a grand larceny, and then I am going to buy my tools back. No, Toby shouted too loud, too fast. No police. Dad, seriously, do not be dramatic. It is done. It was a cash deal. No receipt. The guy is gone. A cash deal. No receipt. For $80,000 of equipment. I looked at Brittany. She looked confused by Toby's panic. She still thought this was about a nursery. She thought she had won. She stood there rubbing her belly, completely oblivious to the fact that her husband was vibrating with fear. You are lying, I said to Toby. You did not sell them to a liquidator. A liquidator would have itemized it. A liquidator would have taken days to move it all. This place was stripped bare. I walked over to the corner where my dust collector used to sit. There was a small piece of paper on the floor, wet from the rain blowing in. I bent down and picked it up. It was a tag, a small yellow tag, with a number on it. The kind of tag they staple to things when they are inventorying them quickly. I held it up. Who is the guy? Toby swallowed hard. I do not know his name. Dad, please just let it go. We will buy you new tools. Better tools. Safer ones. You cannot buy me my father's chisels. I roared, my voice cracked. I felt a tear, hot and angry, slide down my cheek. You stole my father's chisels. I pushed past them, stepping out into the rain. The cold water felt good on my face. It kept me from exploding. I marched toward my truck. Where are you going? Brittany yelled. We are not done discussing the renovation. I ignored her. I looked at Toby, who was standing in the doorway of the empty workshop, looking like a ghost. I am going to find my tools, I said. And God help you, Toby, if I find out you did something other than sell them. I climbed into my truck and slammed the door. As I turned the key, I saw Toby pull his phone out of his pocket. He started typing furiously. He was not calling a liquidator. He was warning someone. I backed out of the driveway, leaving them standing in the rain. I did not know where I was going yet, but I knew this town. I knew every pawn shop, every scrapyard, and every fence in a 50-mile radius. You do not work in construction for 50 years without knowing where stolen tools end up. My shop was a hollow shell, but my memory was not. I drove toward the bad part of town, toward the industrial district, where the street lights were broken and the businesses had bars on the windows. I had a feeling in my gut, a sick, twisting feeling that my Powermatic saw wasn't in a nursery or a warehouse. It was somewhere much worse, and I was going to find it. I drove past the turnoff for the grocery store, I drove past the warm, inviting lights of the local diner where I usually had my Tuesday night meatloaf. My stomach was empty, growling with a hunger I barely felt, but there was no room for food. I was fueled by a cold, hard knot of suspicion that sat heavy in my gut. I knew this town. I knew the places where good tools went to die. And I knew the places where they went when someone needed money fast and did not want to ask questions. I steered my truck toward the south side, down toward the industrial district, where the street lights flickered and the potholes could swallow a tire hole. I checked 3 reputable dealers first. The men who ran those shops knew me. They shook their heads when I showed them the list of my equipment. They told me they hadn't seen anything like that come through. That was what I expected. A legitimate dealer asks for identification. A legitimate dealer cuts a check that takes 3 days to clear. Toby did not have 3 days. He had desperation written all over him. I pulled up to a place called Big Al's Pawn. It was a concrete block building with bars on the windows and a neon sign that buzzed like an angry hornet. It was the kind of place where you went when you had run out of options. I had done work on Al's roof 10 years ago. He was a crook, but he was an honest crook. He didn't lie about being a thief. I pushed open the heavy steel door. A bell jingled, a cheerful sound that clashed with the smell of stale cigarette smoke and old dust. The shelves were cluttered with the debris of broken dreams. Musical instruments, television's power drills with the serial numbers filed off. I walked past a row of bicycles and stopped dead. There it was, sitting in the middle of the aisle, looking like a thoroughbred horse in a donkey stable, my grisly industrial planer. It was a massive machine painted green and white. I walked up to it and ran my hand over the cast iron bed. I had waxed that bed just before I left for my trip. It was still smooth as glass. I looked at the power cord. I had replaced the plug cap with a heavy-duty yellow one 2 years ago, after the original cracked. There it was, the yellow plug. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was one thing to suspect it. It was another thing entirely to see my machine sitting here in this graveyard of possessions. Al came out from the back room, wiping his hands on a rag. He squinted at me, then his eyes widened. Garrett Stone. I haven't seen you in a decade. What brings a man like you to the bottom of the barrel? I pointed at the planer. That is mine, Al. Al looked at the machine, then back at me. He stopped wiping his hands. He leaned against the counter inside. I had a feeling it might be. The kid who brought it in had your nose, but he didn't have your hands. His hands were soft, like he never held a hammer in his life. Toby, my son had dragged my planer here. Did he sell it to you? I asked. My voice was steady, but my fists were clenched at my sides. Al shook his head. He spat into a cup behind the counter. Nope. He didn't sell it, he pawned it. Brought in a whole truckload of stuff. Saw Sanders. Those fancy German drills you like. He unloaded it all, right here on the floor. Said he needed cash, not a check. Cash? I felt a wave of dizziness. Pawned. That meant he intended to get it back. Or at least he pretended he did. How much Al hesitated. He scratched his chin. Look, Garrett, client confidentiality and all that. But I like you. You fixed my roof when it was leaking buckets. He took $15,000. My equipment was worth 5 times that. And the terms I asked, Al grimaced. Standard high-risk loan, 20% interest compounded monthly. If he misses a payment, I keep the tools. And Garrett, he was desperate. He was sweating like a pig in a butcher shop. He kept checking his phone. He told me he needed that money to save his life. Save his life. The words hung in the air between us. I stared at my planer. Toby and Brittany lived like royalty. They drove leased luxury cars. They went on vacations to Cabo and drank $12 coffees. They posted pictures on Instagram of expensive dinners and designer clothes. Why would a man living that life need $15,000 in cash from a pawn shop at 20% interest to save his life. You do not borrow money like that to renovate a nursery. You borrow money like that because you're in deep trouble. This wasn't about a baby. This wasn't about dust or safety. This was about a hole, a deep, dark hole that my son had dug for himself. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my wallet. I did not have $15,000 on me, but I had to do something. I had to prove this was real. I saw a small lie neon block plane sitting in a glass case near the register. It was bronze and beautiful. It was the first high-quality tool I had ever bought for myself back in 1980. I want to buy that back, I said, pointing to the plane. Just that one today. Al looked at me with pity. You can't buy it, Garrett. It is under a pawn ticket. Only the ticket holder can redeem it unless you want to pay the full retail price plus the interest right now as a third party purchase. I pulled out my credit card. Charge it. I walked out of Big Al's with my block plane in my pocket. It was a small victory, a heavy lump of bronze that served as a physical anchor to reality. I wasn't crazy. My son wasn't just disrespectful. He was in danger, and he was a liar. I drove back toward the house. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and black, reflecting the streetlights like oil. My mind was racing. What kind of trouble costs $15,000 immediately gambling drugs, bad investments? I didn't know, but I knew that Brittany was walking around rubbing her belly and talking about paint colors while her husband was selling his father's legacy to pay off a loan shark. I turned onto my street. It was a quiet cul-de-sac, lined with manicured lawns and respectable houses. The kind of place where nothing bad ever happened. I slowed down as I approached my driveway. There was a vehicle parked in front of my gate. It wasn't Toby's sedan and it wasn't Brittany's SUV. It was a black Range Rover, sleek and menacing with tinted windows that were so dark they looked like ink. The engine was idling, the low rumble of the exhaust vibrating in the night air. I pulled my truck to the curb a few houses down and killed the lights. I watched the front door of my house opened. Toby stepped out onto the porch. He wasn't wearing a jacket even though the air was cold and damp. He looked small. He walked down the driveway toward the Range Rover. His shoulders hunched his head down. The driver's side door of the Rover opened. A man stepped out. He was big. He wore a leather jacket that looked too tight across the shoulders. Even from this distance, I could see the ink creeping up his neck. Dark, tribal tattoos that disappeared into his hairline. Toby stopped a few feet away from him. I rolled down my window, straining to hear. "You said you would have it," the man said. His voice was a deep, growly baritone that carried easily in the quiet street. I do, Toby stammered. His voice was high, frantic. "I got the first installment. I just need a few more days for the rest. The bank needs to clear the check." The man stepped closer. He reached out and grabbed Toby by the front of his shirt, bunching the fabric in his fist. He pulled my son close, so close their noses were almost touching. Toby didn't fight back. He went limp like a rag doll. "We don't do checks, Toby." The man said, "We talked about this cash. You have until the end of the week, or we start taking things that you can't buy back." The man shoved Toby backward. My son stumbled and fell onto the wet asphalt of the driveway. He scrambled backward, looking up at the man with terrified eyes. The tattooed man looked up at the house. He looked at the windows where Brittany was probably sleeping, dreaming of her nursery. Then he looked directly at where my truck was parked in the shadows. For a second, I thought he saw me. Then he turned, got back into the Range Rover, and peeled away the tires screeching on the pavement. I sat there in the darkness, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. My son was on his knees in the driveway, weeping into his hands. He hadn't sold my tools for a nursery. He had sold them to pay a thug, and whatever hole he was in, $15,000 was just the down payment. I watched him pick himself up, wipe his face, and trudge back toward the house. He paused at the door, composing himself, putting on the mask of the successful husband, before walking back inside to lie to his wife. I started my truck. I wasn't going in there tonight, not yet. I had the block plane in my pocket, I had the truth from the pawn shop, and now I had a face to put to the threat. I drove away, heading toward the motel out by the highway. I needed to think. I needed a plan because if I went in there now, I would probably kill him myself. But as I drove, a colder realization settled over me. Toby was desperate, and desperate men do dangerous things. If he had already pawned my life's work, what was he going to sell next? I thought about the house I built, the house that sat on land I owned. Or did I? A sudden terrifying thought struck me. I remembered a stack of papers Toby had asked me to sign a few months ago. Insurance forms, he had said, just updating the policy since Mom passed. I had signed them without reading the fine print because I trusted him, because he was my son. I pulled into the motel parking lot, my heart racing faster than it had at the pawn shop. Tomorrow I wasn't going to look for tools. I was going to the county clerk's office. I had to know what else my son had stolen. I walked into the kitchen the next morning feeling like a ghost haunting his own house. The air smelled of burnt toast and tension. I'd spent the night at the motel staring at the ceiling and thinking about the man with the tribal tattoos who had shoved my son onto the driveway. I had thought about the papers Toby made me sign months ago. I knew I had to be careful. If I exploded now, if I revealed what I knew about the loan shark, Toby might bolt or worse. I needed to keep him close. I needed to find out exactly how deep the rot went before I started cutting it out. Brittany was sitting at the island counter scrolling through her phone. She did not look up when I entered. She was wearing a silk robe that probably cost more than my first truck. Toby was standing by the coffee maker, his back to me. I could see the tension in his shoulders. He looked like a man waiting for the executioner. "Good morning," I said. My voice was gravel. Toby jumped. He turned around, forcing a smile that looked painful. "Morning, Dad. You were out late last night. I was driving," I said, simply thinking. Brittany finally put her phone down. She spun her stool around to face me. Her face was set in that hard, determined look she gets when she wants something. There was no guilt in her eyes about the workshop, no shame, just calculation. "We need to talk, Garrett," she said. I poured myself a cup of coffee. The pot was almost empty. "I am listening. The contractor is coming in an hour to start framing the nursery in the garage," she said. I flinched at the word garage. It was a workshop, but I let it slide. "And while he is here, Toby and I decided it would be efficient to make some other changes. We think it is time you move downstairs." I paused with the mug halfway to my mouth. "Downstairs?" "Yes." She continued, her voice brisk and businesslike. "To the basement." I looked at her. Then I looked at Toby. The basement was not a living space. It was a concrete box. I had poured the foundation myself 30 years ago. It was unfinished. There was no drywall, just exposed studs and pink fiberglass insulation that shed dust if you looked at it wrong. The floor was raw concrete. It was cold. It was damp. It was where I stored holiday decorations and old paint cans. It was not a room for a human being. "You want me to live in the basement?" I asked slowly. Brittany sighed. "Look, it makes the most sense. Your bedroom on the first floor is the biggest. It has that beautiful bay window that lets in all the natural light. It is perfect for the baby. We need that light for the nursery photos. Plus, it is right next to our room, so it is easier for feeding." I lowered my mug. My room. The room I had shared with Martha for 40 years. The room where I had held her hand while she took her last breath. Brittany wanted it for photos. "That is my room, Brittany," I said. "It has been my room since 1980. Well, things change," she snapped. And honestly, Garrett, there is another issue. You are noisy. Noisy, I repeated. Yes, you cough at night. You get up to use the bathroom. The floorboards creak. When the baby comes, we cannot have you waking him up every 2 hours because you have an old man's bladder. The basement is quiet. It is secluded. You will have your privacy, and we will have ours. It is better for everyone. I looked at Toby. He was studying the floor tiles intently. Toby, I said, you cannot be serious. You want your father to sleep on concrete next to the furnace. Toby finally looked up. He looked miserable. He looked terrified. Just for a while, Dad. Just until we get settled. Look, I will buy some rugs. And I was thinking, if you move down there, I will buy you a brand new television. A big one, 50 in. You can watch your westerns and your sports as loud as you want without Brittany complaining. It will be like a man cave. A man cave. He was trying to sell me a dungeon by promising me a toy. He was bribing me with a television to give up my dignity. He was treating me like a child who needed to be distracted with a shiny object while the adults talked. I looked around the kitchen I had built. I looked at the crown molding I had installed. I looked at the cabinets I had hung. Every inch of this house had my sweat in it. And now they were banishing me to the dark underside of it. They were treating me like a piece of broken furniture that was too embarrassing to keep in the living room, but too heavy to throw out. My first instinct was to fight to tell them that my name was on the deed and I could throw them out into the street. But then I remembered the black Range Rover. I remembered the thug grabbing Toby's shirt. I remembered the papers I had signed without reading. If I fought them now, if I kicked them out, I would never find those papers. I would never know what Toby had done with the title to my house. I needed access. I needed to be inside the perimeter. If I left or if I forced them out, Toby might panic and disappear, leaving me with a mess I couldn't fix. But if I was in the basement, if I was the invisible old man in the cellar, they would stop watching me. They would get careless. I looked at Brittany. She was tapping her fingernails on the granite countertop, impatient. She expected a fight. She was ready for it. I looked at Toby. He was chewing his lip, waiting for me to yell. I took a sip of my cold coffee. I let my shoulders slump. I let my face go slack, mimicking the tired, defeated old man they wanted me to be. Okay, I said softly. The silence in the kitchen was deafening. Brittany stopped tapping. Toby's mouth fell open. What Brittany asked suspicious, I said. Okay, I repeated. You are right. I do cough. I do not want to wake the baby. And a new TV sounds nice, Toby. My eyes are not what they used to be. A big screen would help. Brittany blinked. She looked like she had swung a bat and hit nothing but air. She recovered quickly, a smug smile spreading across her face. Well, good. I'm glad you're finally being reasonable, Garrett. It is about time you prioritize this family. I will start moving my things today, I said, before the contractor gets here. That would be best, she said, standing up. I want to start painting your room by the weekend. Sage green, I think, to match the yoga space. She breathed out of the room, victory in every step. Toby lingered for a moment. He looked at me with a mixture of relief and guilt that made him look sick. Thanks, Dad, he mumbled. It really is for the best. I promise I will get the TV set up tonight. I will run a cable line down there and everything. Sure, son, I said. Just help me carry the bed frame. We spent the next 2 hours moving my life underground. It was humiliating, carrying my clothes, my books, my few personal treasures, down those creaky wooden stairs into the gloom. The basement smelled of mildew and cold earth. The single window was a narrow slit high up on the wall, crusted with dirt, letting in a thin gray light that barely reached the floor. We set up my bed in the corner near the water heater. The pilot light hissed like a snake. Toby brought down an old rug from the hallway, tossing it over the concrete. It did nothing to stop the chill radiating up through the soles of my shoes. There, Toby said, dusting his hands off. Cozy. He did not look me in the eye. He turned and practically ran back up the stairs, eager to get away from the evidence of his own cruelty. I stood there in the silence. I was 70 years old, a master builder, a father, a husband, and I was living in a cellar. But I did not sit down to cry. I waited. I waited until I heard Brittany's car leave the driveway. I waited until I heard Toby go into the living room to watch football. Then I moved. I unpacked one box, not clothes, not books. It was a box of tools I had kept in my bedroom closet, the ones I kept close for household repairs. Screwdrivers, pliers, a small pry bar. I walked softly up the basement stairs. I listened at the door. Silence in the hallway. I crept out. I went straight to Toby's home office. It was the room at the end of the hall, the one he always kept locked. He said it was because of client confidentiality. I knew now it was because he was hiding his disaster of a life. I tried the handle. Locked. Of course. I knelt down. The lock on this door was a simple interior privacy lock, a joke compared to the deadbolts I installed for a living. I pulled a thin wire tool from my pocket. It took me 3 seconds to pop it. I opened the door and stepped inside. The room was a mess. Papers everywhere, takeout containers. It smelled of stale fear. I went to the desk. I wasn't interested in the mess. I was interested in the file cabinet. I needed to find the deed. I needed to see exactly what I had signed. I left the door slightly ajar, just a hair. I unlocked the mechanism from the inside so it would look like it was latched but wouldn't actually catch. Tonight when they were sleeping, I would come back. They thought they had put me in a hole to rot. They didn't realize they had just given me a base of operations. I wasn't the prisoner in the basement. I was the wolf waiting under the floorboards. I went back downstairs and sat on my bed. The cold from the concrete seeped into my bones, but the fire in my chest kept me warm. I looked at the water heater. I looked at the exposed pipes. Let them have their nursery. Let them have their sage green paint. I was going to find the truth, and when I did, no one in this house would be sleeping soundly ever again. I sat in the darkness of the basement, listening to the furnace tick as it cooled down. The glow of the pilot light was the only company I had. My hand was still clenched around the small USB drive in my pocket, the plastic warm from my body heat. It contained the proof of my son's betrayal, a digital record of how he planned to sell the roof over my head to cover his gambling losses. $300 Susan dollars gone, $50,000 owed to violent men, and now an application to drain $800 of equity from my home using a forged signature. I felt a cold fury settle in my gut, replacing the shock. He wasn't just a failure, he was a predator, and he was hunting me. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on the lumpy mattress, formulating a plan. I couldn't just confront him, not yet. If I walked upstairs and waved that USB drive in his face, he would panic. He might do something desperate or worse. Brittany might find out too soon and spin a web of lies to protect herself. I needed to let him hang himself. I needed him to commit the act so I could catch him with his hand in the jar. Morning came with the sound of heavy footsteps overhead. The contractor. I heard the muffled sounds of hammers and saws coming from the workshop, my workshop. They were tearing out the shelves I had built. They were erasing 40 years of my history to make room for a yoga mat. I put on my work boots and trudged up the stairs. I needed to play my part. I needed to be the confused, defeated old man they wanted to see. When I entered the kitchen, the scene was almost domestic. Brittany was flipping through a catalog of baby furniture, circling items with a gold pen. Toby was pacing by the window, his phone pressed to his ear. Yeah, I understand the timeline. He was saying, his voice tight. The appraisal is today. Okay, yes, the owner will be available. He hung up when he saw me shoving the phone into his pocket like it was a weapon. Morning, Dad. He said, his voice too loud, too cheerful. How was the basement sleep? Okay. I shuffled to the coffee pot. letting my hand tremble just a little as I reached for a mug. "It's cold down there, son," I mumbled. "Damp, my arthritis is flaring up." Brittany didn't look up from her catalog. "We'll get you a space heater, Garrett. Stop complaining. Think of it as an adventure, like camping. Camping in my own cellar." Toby cleared his throat. "Hey, Dad. Speaking of the house, I've got a buddy coming over later, an appraiser. Just for insurance purposes, you know. Since we're doing the renovations on the garage, we need to update the policy value. He just needs to walk around, take a few pictures. You don't need to worry about it. Insurance. That was the lie. He needed an appraisal for the loan. He needed to prove the house was worth enough to steal $800,000 from it." "Okay," I said, staring into my black coffee. "Whatever you say, Toby. You handle the paperwork. I'm tired." Toby exchanged a look with Brittany. I saw the relief wash over him. He thought I was fading. He thought I was giving up. "Great," he said. "Why don't you go for a walk later around 2? Get some fresh air. You don't want to be here when the guy comes. It might be boring." He wanted me gone so the appraiser wouldn't ask the actual owner any questions. He probably planned to tell the guy I was a tenant, or maybe that I was already senile and he had power of attorney. "I'll go to the park," I said. "Feed the ducks." "Perfect," Toby said. He patted my shoulder. His hand felt heavy like a betrayal. I finished my coffee and went back downstairs. But I didn't go to the park. I went out the basement door that led to the backyard garden. I waited until Toby left in his car, probably to meet the loan shark or his lawyer, and Brittany went upstairs to nap. Then I walked into town. I didn't go to feed ducks. I went to the bank. I found my old friend Stan, who had been the branch manager for 20 years. We had fished together back in the 90s. He looked older now, grayer, but his eyes were sharp. "Garrett." He boomed when I walked into his office. "I haven't seen you since Martha's funeral. How are you holding up?" I sat down in the leather chair opposite his desk. "I'm tired, Stan. But I need a favor. A big one." Stan leaned forward, his smile fading. "Name it my son Toby. He's applying for a helilock on my property. He's using an online lender, some outfit called Quick Cash or something similar." Stan nodded slowly. "I've heard of them. Predatory rates." "Why is he applying?" "The house is in your name, Garrett. I checked the records last week when you deposited that pension check. He's forging my signature." "Stan," I said, my voice flat, "he's stealing the equity." Stan's face went pale. "Garrett, that's a felony." "I know. I have the proof on a thumb drive, but I need to know if the application has hit the system yet. I need to know if there's a lien pending." Stan typed furiously on his keyboard. He frowned, clicking through screens. "Here it is. A credit inquiry came through this morning. A title search request. Garrett, he's moving fast. Once that title search clears, they could fund the loan in 48 hours. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. 48 hours. That was the timeline. "Can you stop it?" I asked. Stan shook his head. "Not directly. It's not our bank, but I can flag the title. I can put a fraud alert on your credit report. It won't stop the application, but it will force them to call you directly for verification. They'll have to speak to the owner." "Do it," I said. "But Stan, don't decline it yet." He looked at me confused. "What, Garrett, you need to shut this down." "Not yet," I said. "I want him to think it's going through. I want him to think he's won. I need him to bring the final papers to the house because I'm going to throw him a party." I said, a grim smile touching my lips. "A surprise party, and I want all the guests to see exactly what he is." Stan looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded. "You always were a stubborn son of a gun, Garrett. Okay, I'll flag it. So it requires a verbal confirmation from you, but I'll tell the system the number on file is, well, I can't change the number to yours without official paperwork. Toby probably put his own number on the application, I realized. Leave it, I said. Just delay it. Make them ask for more documents. Make them ask for a notarized affidavit of occupancy. Stan smiled. The red tape special. I can do that. That will buy you a week. A week? That was all I needed. I left the bank feeling lighter. I walked back home, stopping at a print shop on the way. I had the thumb drive in my pocket. I printed out the emails, the crypto losses, the forged signature scans. I made copies, high-resolution color copies. When I got back to the house, I saw the appraiser leaving. He was a young guy with a clipboard looking bored. Toby was shaking his hand vigorously at the front door, looking like he'd just run a marathon. I slipped into the backyard and entered the basement unseen. I hid the documents under my mattress. That evening, I sat on my bed in the cold basement. I could hear Toby and Brittany upstairs. They were laughing. The tension from the morning was gone. Toby must have thought the appraisal went well. He must have thought he was in the clear. I looked at the flyer I'd fished out of the trash bin earlier that day. It was crumpled and stained with coffee grounds, but the text was legible. Sunny Meadows Care Home, immediate vacancy. Memory care unit, budget friendly. And in Brittany's handwriting, right across the top, cheapest option. Takes Medicare, can drop off Monday. Monday. That was 4 days away. They weren't just stealing my house. They were planning to dispose of me like the workshop trash. They were going to dump me in a state-run facility for the senile so they could enjoy their renovations and their stolen money in peace. I crumpled the flyer in my fist. Okay, Toby, I whispered to the empty room. You want to play games? You want to talk about memory care? I'm going to give you a memory you will never forget. I pulled out my phone. I had one more stop to make before the big reveal. I needed spy gear cameras, microphones, because if they were going to plot my demise in my own living room, I wanted it in 4K resolution. Monday was coming, but so was I. The next morning, I told Brittany I was going to the hardware store to look for a specific type of hinge for the basement door. It was a lie. Of course, I did not need a hinge. I needed the truth. I drove my truck 3 blocks, parked it behind the old cinema, and walked the rest of the way to the bank. I needed to see Stan again. The digital alert he had placed on the title was just a stopgap. I needed to see the actual paperwork. I needed to see the weapon my son was using to kill me. Stan was waiting for me in his office. He looked tired, like he had lost sleep over this too. He didn't say a word when I walked in. He just slid a manila envelope across his polished mahogany desk. His hands were clasped tight in front of him, white-knuckled. I sat down and opened the envelope. Inside was a photocopy of a document titled Quit Claim Deed. For those who do not know, a quit claim deed is a terrifying piece of paper. It is not a mortgage application. It is not a loan. It is a document that says, I hereby transfer all my rights and ownership of this property to this other person. It is a surrender. It is giving away the keys to the kingdom. I stared at the paper. The date was from 3 days ago. The grantor was Garrett Stone. The grantee was Toby Stone. And at the bottom of the page was my signature. I felt the air leave my lungs. It was my signature. The loops on the G, the sharp cross on the T. It looked exactly like the way I signed my checks. But I had never seen this document in my life. I pulled my reading glasses out of my pocket and leaned closer, studying the ink. It was too perfect. When a man signs his name, there are variations. A little tremor here, a lighter pressure there, especially at 70 years old. My hands have vibrated from years of using impact drivers and hammer drills. My signature has a rhythm, a shaky cadence. This signature on the deed was smooth. It was confident. It was static. It was a tracing. I remembered a birthday card I had given Toby last month. I had signed it with a heavy felt tip pen. Love, Dad, Garrett Stone. He had taken that card. He had put it on a light box or against a window. And he had traced my name onto a document that stole my home. He didn't just steal my property, he stole my name. He used my love for him, a birthday card for God's sake, as the instrument of his theft. This is it, isn't it? Stan asked quietly. I nodded. I could not speak. The betrayal was a physical weight in my stomach, heavy as lead. Stan sighed. He filed this with the county recorder electronically. It is pending review. That is why the loan application went through so fast. As far as the lender is concerned, Toby owns the house free and clear. He is not borrowing against your equity, Garrett. He is borrowing against his own asset. Once this deed is recorded, you are just a squatter in your own home. A squatter. I built the foundation of that house. I framed the walls. I shingled the roof in the middle of July heat. And now on paper, I was a trespasser. Cancel it, I whispered. I can't, Stan said. I am a banker, not a judge. But I have flagged it as fraudulent with the recorder's office. They will require a notarized confirmation from you before they finalize the title transfer. That buys you time. But Garrett, you need a lawyer. This is criminal. This is prison time. I looked at the signature again. I remembered teaching Toby how to write his name. I remembered sitting at the kitchen table, his small hand in mine guiding the pencil. Big T, little O loop the B. I had taught him to make his mark on the world, and he had used that skill to erase me. I stood up, taking the envelope. I did not want a lawyer, not yet. A lawyer would send a letter. A lawyer would make phone calls. I wanted something more visceral. I wanted to look him in the eye when the trap snapped shut. Thank you, Stan. I said, do not approve anything. Just keep stalling. I walked out of the bank into the gray Seattle drizzle. I felt numb. The anger was gone, replaced by a cold, hollow clarity. My son was not just desperate. He was gone. The boy I raised was dead. The man living in my house was a stranger who would carve me up for parts if it meant he could keep his lease on a Range Rover. I walked home slowly, taking the long way through the park. I needed to compose my face. I needed to put the mask back on. The confused old man, the senile father. When I turned onto my street, I saw the garbage truck rumbling away from the curb. It was collection day. The bins were empty, tossed haphazardly on the grass strip. I walked up the driveway to drag them back to the side of the house. That is when I saw it. A single piece of glossy paper had fallen out of the recycling bin before the truck could grab it. It was stuck to the wet asphalt fluttering in the wind. A bright, cheerful yellow flyer. I bent down to pick it up. My knees popped. I wiped the mud off the surface. Sunny Meadows Care Facility. The headline read in bold, cheerful font. Dignified living for seniors with memory issues. I stared at the picture of the smiling old woman in a wheelchair. Sunny Meadows. I knew that place. It was 2 towns over. It was a warehouse for the dying. It was where you sent people when you had no money and no conscience. It smelled of urine and boiled cabbage. It was a place where people went to be forgotten. But it was the handwriting in the margin that made my vision blur. It was Brittany's handwriting. Sharp, angular letters in blue ink. Takes Medicare. She had written, immediate vacancy in the secure ward. Can drop off Monday morning. Today was Thursday. They gave me 4 days. Drop off. Like I was a bag of old clothes at a donation center. Like I was a stray dog. They weren't just stealing my house. They were planning to imprison me. The secure ward meant the lockdown unit. The unit for dementia patients who wandered. The unit where you couldn't leave. They were going to take the money from the loan, pay off the shark, renovate the house, and lock me away in a state-funded hellhole so I couldn't tell anyone what they had done. They were going to tell the neighbors I had lost my mind. They were going to tell my friends I needed professional help. They were going to erase me completely. I stood there in the driveway, the rain mixing with the cold sweat on my face. I looked at the house. It looked warm and inviting. The lights were on in the kitchen. I could see Brittany moving around, probably making another smoothie. I could see Toby sitting at the table, probably looking at his phone, waiting for the loan to fund. They were in there, living their lives, planning their nursery, eating my food, while holding a ticket to my execution. I folded the flyer carefully and put it in my pocket right next to the forged deed. Monday. They wanted to drop me off on Monday. Well, I had news for them. Monday was going to be a very busy day. I dragged the bins back to the garage. I walked up the steps to the back porch. I wiped my boots on the mat. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the damp air. I opened the door and stepped into the kitchen. "Hey, Dad," Toby said, looking up from his phone. He smiled. It was a weak, watery smile. "Did you get your hinge?" I smiled back. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. "No," I said, shuffling my feet, letting my voice quaver just a little. I forgot what size I needed. My memory. It just isn't what it used to be. Brittany looked up from the sink. She exchanged a glance with Toby. A look of triumph, a look that said, "He is fading, it will be easy." "Don't worry, Garrett," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "We will take care of everything." "Yes," I thought, gripping the flyer in my pocket. "You certainly have a plan." I walked past them, heading for the basement door. "I am going to take a nap," I said. The walk tired me out. I went down the stairs into the dark. I sat on my bed. I pulled out the flyer and smoothed it out on the mattress. I pulled out the deed and laid it next to it. The evidence was complete. The motive was clear. The weapon was forged. I reached into my bag and pulled out the small black box I had bought from the spy shop downtown, a hidden camera disguised as a smoke detector and a digital voice recorder small enough to tape under a table. If they thought I was losing my mind, I was going to give them a show. I was going to give them the best performance of my life. And while they were busy applauding their own cleverness, I was going to bury them. Monday was coming, and I was going to be ready. I spent the next hour in front of the cracked mirror in the basement bathroom practicing my performance. It is a strange thing for a man to practice his own decline. I let my jaw go slack. I stared at a point just past my own reflection, letting my eyes glaze over until they looked watery and vacant. I unbuttoned my flannel shirt and rebuttoned it, intentionally missing a loop so the hem hung unevenly. I messed up my hair, pulling a few tufts up so I looked like I had just rolled out of bed and forgotten where I was. It was humiliating. It felt like I was mocking every old friend I'd ever visited in a nursing home, every man I had seen lose his battle with time. But I had to do it. If I wanted to catch a pair of wolves, I had to look like a wounded sheep. I had to make them believe the lie so completely that they would stop whispering and start shouting their plans. I went upstairs around 6:00. The smell of roasted chicken filled the hallway. It was a smell that used to mean family comfort and Sunday dinners. Now it just smelled like theft. They were eating my food in my kitchen while planning to throw me into a hole. I shuffled into the room, dragging my feet. I made sure my boots scuffed loudly on the hardwood. Toby was at the table opening a bottle of wine. Brittany was setting out plates. They stopped when they saw me. I saw Brittany's eyes flick to my misbed shirt, then to my messy hair. A small, cruel smile touched her lips. "Hungry, Dad?" Toby asked, his voice loud and slow, like he was talking to someone who was hard of hearing. I blinked at him, taking a beat too long to answer. "Yes? Is it lunchtime?" Brittany let out a short, sharp laugh. "It is dinner time, Garrett. It is dark outside." "Look," she pointed to the window. I stared at it, squinting. "Oh, right. Dark. The days. They go so fast. Now sit down," Toby said, pulling out a chair. He did not offer me wine. He poured me a glass of tap water. I sat down heavily. My hands were resting on the table and I made them tremble. It wasn't hard. The rage inside me was vibrating so fast, it felt like a tremor. Anyway, Brittany placed a bowl of soup in front of me. Tomato bisque. It was from a can. I could tell by the color. They were eating roast chicken with rosemary potatoes. I got canned soup. I picked up my spoon. I held it with a loose grip, letting it clatter against the ceramic bowl. I lifted a spoonful, bringing it halfway to my mouth, and then I let my hand jerk. The red soup splashed all over the table. It soaked into the placemat. It dripped onto my lap. "Oh, for God's sake!" Brittany snapped, dropping her fork. "Garrett, look what you did." I stared at the mess, letting my lower lip tremble. I looked up at her. I focused my eyes on her face, but I looked through her. I summoned the memory of my wife. The woman who would have cleaned this up with a gentle word and a warm cloth. "I am sorry, Martha," I whispered. My voice broke. "I am so sorry, honey. I did not mean to ruin the tablecloth." The room went dead silent. Brittany froze. She looked at Toby. Her eyes were wide, not with sympathy, but with excitement. It was the look of a gambler who just saw the dealer bust. "He called me Martha," she whispered to Toby. "He thinks I am his dead wife." Toby looked at me, his face pale. "Dad, it is Brittany. Mom is gone." I looked around the room, mimicking confusion. Gone. No, she was just here. She was making coffee, 2 sugars. I put my head in my hands and let out a sob. It was acting, but the tears were real. I was crying for the disrespect. I was crying because I had to use my dead wife's name as a weapon to save my own life. Brittany stood up. She walked over to Toby and squeezed his shoulder. She leaned down, but she didn't whisper low enough. "See?" she hissed. "I told you he is gone. He is completely lumping it." "It is dangerous, Toby. What if he leaves the stove on? What if he thinks the baby is, I don't know, a cat? We can't have this." Toby looked at me, then at the soup on the table. Yeah, you are right. He is getting worse fast. We need to accelerate the timeline. Brittany said Sunny Meadows said they have a bed now. If we wait, we might lose it. Let's just get through the weekend. Toby said the loan funds on Tuesday. We need him here to sign the final notary book if the bank sends someone out. He is not going to be able to sign anything if he thinks I am, Martha Brittany argued, but she sat back down. Fine. But he goes downstairs now. I can't eat with him staring at me like that. It creeps me out. Toby stood up. "Come on, Dad. Let's get you cleaned up. Let's go back to your room." He led me downstairs like a toddler. He didn't even help me change my soup-stained pants. He just sat me on the bed and turned on the small TV he had brought down. It was an old monitor from his off office, not the 50-in screen he had promised. "You stay here, Dad." He said, "Watch some shows." He went upstairs and locked the door. I heard the deadbolt click. They had locked me in my own basement. I waited. I sat on the bed and counted to $1,000. I listened to the sounds of the house. I heard the clink of silverware. I heard the TV in the living room. Then I heard the back door open. I heard them go out onto the deck. The smell of marijuana smoke drifted down through the vents. They were celebrating. They were getting high on their victory. Now I moved. I did not shuffle. I moved with the precision of a man who had walked scaffolding at 20 stories. I used my wire tool to pop the lock on the basement door again. It was getting easier every time. I slipped into the hallway. I had the bag from the spy shop in my pocket. I had 3 devices, small black squares, no bigger than a matchbook. They were motion-activated cameras with microphones battery-operated transmitting directly to the cloud. I went to the living room first. I slid one camera behind the books on the built-in shelves, angling it toward the sofa where they sat every night. It blended perfectly with the shadows. Then I went to the kitchen. I placed the second one on top of the refrigerator, pushed back against the wall. It had a perfect view of the table and the back door. The third one was for the workshop. I slipped out the side door, moving through the shadows of the yard. The rain had started again, a light drizzle that covered my footsteps. The workshop door, my old shop, now their project, was unlocked. They were so arrogant, they didn't even secure it anymore. I stepped inside. It smelled of fresh paint and stupidity. The walls were already half painted a nauseating shade of green. My workbench was gone, replaced by stacks of laminate flooring. I climbed up the ladder to the small loft storage area I had built years ago. It looked down over the whole floor. I nestled the third camera into a pile of old insulation I had left up there. It had a bird's eye view of the entire space. I was back in the basement in 10 minutes. I locked the door from the inside to make it look like it had never been opened. I changed my shirt. I lay down on the bed and pulled out my phone. I opened the app linked to the cameras. The feeds popped up, grainy but clear. I saw the living room empty. I saw the kitchen empty. I saw the workshop dark. Then the kitchen feed flickered. Brittany and Toby walked in. They were laughing. Toby was holding a bottle of champagne. To the future, Toby said, popping the cork to the stone estate. They clinked glasses. Brittany hopped up onto the counter. She looked at Toby, her eyes gleaming with malice. "So here is the plan," she said. The camera picked up her voice perfectly. Every syllable was crisp. "Tell me," Toby said, taking a long drink. "Monday is the baby shower," she said. "We have all the influencers coming. We have the caterer. It has to be perfect. We keep him in the basement all day. Tell the guests he is away on a cruise, or that he is sick and contagious. Whatever. Just keep him hidden." And then Toby asked, "Then when the last guest leaves around 6 p.m., we call 911. 911, Toby asked, pausing with the glass at his lips. "Yes," Brittany said. "We tell them he became violent. We tell them he started smashing things. We tell them he threatened the baby. We say he is having a psychotic break. The ambulance comes, they sedate him. They take him to the ER for a psychiatric hold. From there, the social worker transfers him directly to the secure ward at Sunny Meadows." Toby hesitated. That is intense, Britt. A psychotic break. "It is the only way to bypass the waiting list," she said coolly. "If he is a danger to himself or others, they have to take him immediately. And once he is in the system with a dementia diagnosis, nobody is going to listen to a word he says about forged deeds or stolen tools. He will just be another crazy old man rambling about conspiracies." Toby looked at his champagne. He swirled it around, then he shrugged. "Okay," he said. Monday night. Goodbye, Dad. I watched on the small screen of my phone as my son toasted to my destruction. My hand tightened around the device until the plastic creaked. Monday night. They were going to frame me. They were going to paint me as a monster to justify locking me in a cage. I turned off the phone. I lay back in the dark. Monday night was the deadline, but the baby shower started at noon. That gave me a window, a public window, a window with an audience. If they wanted a show, I thought, closing my eyes, I was going to give them the performance of a lifetime, and I wasn't going to be the only one on stage. I slipped out of the house the next morning, while Brittany was busy berating a delivery driver over the shade of napkins he had brought for the party. I told Toby I was going to the pharmacy to pick up ointment for a rash. It was humiliating to invent these ailments, but it kept them from asking questions. I drove my truck 3 towns over to a place called the Rusty Spoon. It was an old diner, the kind with vinyl booths that had been patched with duct tape, and a waitress who had been working the counter since the Nixon administration. It was the last place on earth my daughter-in-law would ever set foot. I walked to the back booth. Mr. Higgins was already there. He was my attorney, but more than that, he was an old friend from the days when I was contracting commercial buildings. He was 75, wore a suit that was 10 years out of style, and had a mind like a steel trap. He was nursing a black coffee and reading the sports section. "Garrett," he said, nodding as I slid into the booth, "you look like hell." "I feel like hell, Arthur," I said. I ordered a coffee and got straight to the point. I pulled the envelope from my jacket. I laid out the photos of the workshop, the receipt from the pawn shop, the flyer for Sunny Meadows, and the copy of the forged quit-claim deed. Higgins put on his reading glasses. He went through the documents slowly. He did not gasp. He did not shake his head. He just got quieter and quieter. That is how I knew he was angry. Arthur Higgins only got quiet when he was preparing to destroy someone. "This deed," he said, tapping the paper with a manicured fingernail. "This is a clumsy forgery. The witness signatures look like they were written by the same hand as the notary seal." "It is a tracing," I said. "He traced my signature from a birthday card." Higgins looked up at me over his glasses. "It is a felony, Garrett. Forgery, real estate fraud, elder abuse. If we take this to the district attorney, your son is looking at 5 to 10 years in state prison. Minimum." I stared at the coffee swirling in my cup. Prison. My son in a cage. It was a thought that made my stomach turn, but then I remembered the basement. I remembered the cold concrete and the plan to drug me and drag me to a state ward. "There is something else, Arthur," I said. "Something Toby does not know. Something I never told him because I wanted him to make his own way in the world." Higgins raised an eyebrow. "What is that Toby thinks he stole the house from me?" I said. "He thinks that by forging my signature on that deed, he transferred the title from Garrett Stone to Toby Stone." "And didn't he?" Higgins asked. "No," I said, "because Garrett Stone does not own that house." Higgins paused. A slow smile spread across his face. He leaned back in the booth. "The trust. The trust." I confirmed. 10 years ago, after Toby got arrested for that DUI and tried to sue the police department, I realized he had no sense of responsibility. "Martha and I sat down with you right in your office phonus, and we moved everything, the house, the land, the savings accounts. We moved it all into the Stone family irrevocable trust." I remember Higgins said, chuckling softly, "I drew up the papers myself." "Exactly," I said. "I am not the owner. I am just the primary beneficiary during my lifetime. The legal owner of the property is the trust, and the trustee is you." Higgins laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "So this quit-claim deed, this document, he risked his freedom to forge. His toilet paper," I finished. "It is legally void. You cannot transfer a property you do not own personally. He tried to steal a house from a ghost." Higgins took a sip of his coffee, shaking his head. "So the bank loan he is applying, for the one secured by the property, it will never fund." I said, "The moment the title company does a deep dive, they will see the trust holds the deed, but Stan at the bank is stalling them. He is making Toby think it is just a paperwork delay. He thinks the money is coming next week." "This is beautiful," Higgins said in a tragic Shakespearean sort of way. "So what is the play, Garrett? We can file an injunction today. We can have the police at your door in an hour. We can stop this right now." I shook my head. "No, not today." "No, not." "Why," Higgins asked, "you are sleeping in a basement, Garrett. Every day you stay there is a risk. Because if we stop it now, they will spin it." I said, "Brittany is an influencer. She lives her life online. If I call the cops now, she will post a video crying about her senile father-in-law who is confused and aggressive. She will twist the narrative. She will say, 'I signed it and forgot.' She will say, 'I am the villain.'" I leaned forward. "I need witnesses, Arthur. I need an audience. I need to strip them bare in front of the very people they are trying to impress." "Monday," I said, "Monday at noon, the baby shower." Higgins whistled low. "That is cold, Garrett." "They are planning to commit me to an asylum on Monday night," I said. My voice was hard as iron. They have the ambulance scheduled, so I am going to throw the first punch. I want you to draw up the eviction papers not just for Toby, for both of them. Immediate removal from the premises for violation of the trust bylaws regarding abuse of the beneficiary. I can do that, Higgins said, pulling a notepad from his pocket. I will have the papers ready. I will bring the sheriff to serve them. No sheriff yet, I said. Just you bring the papers. Bring the original trust documents. Come to the party at 1-0. Pretend you are a guest. I want to see their faces, Arthur. I want to look my son in the eye when he realizes he didn't just lose a house, he lost his father. And he did it for nothing. Higgins nodded. He wrote down the date and time. I will be there, Garrett. With bells on. I drove back to the house feeling a strange sense of calm. The chess pieces were moving. The trap was set. All I had to do was wait. I parked my truck on the street so I wouldn't block the driveway for the contractor's vans. I walked up the path, hunching my shoulders, putting the mask back on. When I opened the front door, Toby was waiting for me in the hallway. He was practically vibrating with energy. His face was flushed. He looked like a man who had just won the lottery. Dad? He shouted. He grabbed my hand and shook it. Dad, you are back. Great, listen, I have amazing news. I blinked at him playing the confused old man. News is the baby here? Toby laughed. No, not yet. Better the bank. My guy at the bank just called. The loan is approved. Preliminarily approved. He was lying. Or rather, he was repeating the lie Stan had fed him. Stan had told him it was approved pending final review just to keep him on the hook. That is nice, Toby, I mumbled. Does that mean I can get a heater for the basement? Toby waved his hand dismissively. Dad, you can have 10 heaters. We are going to be rich. I mean, comfortable. We are going to be comfortable. The money hits the account on Tuesday. $800,000. He looked around the hallway, his eyes wide and manic. I am going to fix everything. I am going to pay off the renovation costs. I am going to buy Brittany that new car she wants. We are going to be set. He was spending money he didn't have based on a crime he had already committed secured by a house he didn't own. It was pathetic. I am happy for you, son, I said. I truly am. I walked past him toward the basement door. Where are you going? He asked. Nap time, I said. I am tired, Toby. So very tired. Sleep well, Dad, he called after me. Dream big. I closed the basement door and locked it from the inside. I sat on my bed and looked at the camera feed on my phone. Brittany was in the kitchen, holding up a sample of sage green paint against the wall. Toby walked in and hugged her from behind, burying his face in her neck. We did it, babe, I heard him say through the tiny speaker. We actually pulled it off. The old man doesn't have a clue. Brittany laughed. I told you he is a vegetable. By Tuesday, we will have the money. By Monday night, he will be in Sunny Meadows. And this house will finally be ours. I watched them celebrate. I watched them dance in my kitchen. Enjoy the music, I whispered to the screen because the band stops playing on Monday. Monday morning arrived with the sky so aggressively blue, it felt like a mockery of the storm brewing inside my house. I woke up to the sound of trucks beeping in the driveway. Not construction trucks, catering trucks, a florist van, a rental company delivering white Chiovary chairs that probably cost more to rent for an afternoon than I spent on groceries in a month. It was the day of the baby shower, or as I like to call it, the day of reckoning. I sat on the edge of my basement bed, listening to the thumping of footsteps overhead. It sounded like an army was mobilizing. Brittany was barking orders. Move that arch to the left. Know the hydrangeas need to face the sun. Be careful with that champagne tower. I checked my equipment. The camera hidden in the smoke detector in the living room was online. The one in the workshop loft was recording. My phone battery was at 100%. I had the Bluetooth earbud in my pocket, ready to tune into the conversations they thought were private. I heard the lock on the basement door click open. I quickly shoved the phone under my pillow and hunched my shoulders, putting on my mask. The confused old man, the burden. Brittany stood at the top of the stairs. She looked like a pageant queen. Her hair was done up in elaborate curls, and she was wearing a long, flowy dress in a shade of pale pink that probably had a name like Blush or Petal. She held a plastic bag in her hand. "Garrett, come up here," she called down. Her voice was tight. She was stressed. Perfection takes a toll. I trudged up the stairs, blinking in the bright light of the kitchen. The room was unrecognizable. There were towers of macarons on the counter. There were crystal flutes lined up like soldiers. A banner hung across the window that said "Baby Stone" in gold glitter letters. "Here," she said, thrusting the plastic bag at my chest. "Put these on." I looked inside. It was a pair of old stained coveralls I used for painting the exterior of the house 10 years ago, and a straw hat that had been crushed in the bottom of a closet. Why, I asked, letting my voice quaver. I have my church suit. I can wear that." Brittany's face twisted in horror. "No, absolutely not. You are not wearing that moth-eaten suit. Listen to me, Garrett. We have very important people coming today. Influencers, investors, people who matter." She stepped closer, lowering her voice, though there was no one to hear but the caterers who were ignoring us anyway. "I told everyone that Toby's father is a retired architectural tycoon who is currently vacationing in the south of France. They think you are in Europe, sipping wine on a yacht." I stared at her. A tycoon in France. So I asked slowly, "If I am in France, who am I supposed to be?" She pointed a manicured finger at the bag. "You are the gardener, the help. We need someone to stand by the front gate and make sure nobody parks on the grass and the hedges look a little messy. You can trim them while you stand there. It adds to the ambiance." A rustic touch. I looked at the bag, then I looked at her. She was asking the man who built this house, the man who paid for the roof over her head, to dress up like a servant and trim bushes at his own grandson's party, because she was ashamed of him. She wanted me to be a prop, a lawn ornament. It was so cruel, so perfectly shallow that I almost laughed. But I didn't, because this was perfect. This was exactly what I needed. If I was the gardener, I was invisible. If I was the help, no one would look twice at me until it was too late. "Okay, Brittany," I mumbled, clutching the bag. "I used to like gardening. Martha liked the roses." She rolled her eyes. "Great, just go change in the garage. I mean the nursery. And stay outside. Do not come in for food. Do not talk to the guests. If anyone asks you, just smile and nod." "Understand? I understand," I said. I went out to the workshop. The contractors had left for the weekend, leaving it half finished. I put on the stained coveralls. They smelled of old turpentine. I put on the crushed straw hat. I looked in the reflection of the glass door. I looked like a scarecrow. I looked like a man who had lost everything. "Good," I whispered to myself. "Let them see this." I grabbed a pair of shears from the pile of tools Toby hadn't pawned yet because they weren't worth anything. I walked to the front gate and took my post. Around noon, the cars started arriving. And Lord, what a parade it was. Range Rovers, Teslas, BMWs. They lined up along the curb, shining in the sun. The guests stepped out looking like they had stepped out of a magazine. The women wore high heels that clicked on my driveway. The men wore loafers with no socks and sunglasses that cost more than my first car. They walked past me without seeing me. I was just part of the scenery, like the mailbox or the fire hydrant. A few of them glanced at my coveralls with mild distaste, stepping wide to avoid brushing against the grease stains. "Nice touch with the authentic gardener," one man said to his wife as they passed. "Very Downtown Abbey." I snipped at a branch of boxwood, keeping my head down. My earbud was in my left ear, hidden by the brim of the straw hat. I tapped the screen on my phone, which was deep in the pocket of the coveralls. I switched the audio feed to the living room microphone. The sound of clinking glass and high-pitched laughter filled my ear. I could hear Brittany holding court. "Oh, thank you," she was saying. "Yes, we did the renovations ourselves. Toby has such an eye for design. We wanted to open up the space." Toby's voice joined in. "It is all about flow. You know how it is. We wanted a modern aesthetic, but with respect for the traditional bones of the house, respect. He had forged a deed and sold my tools. He didn't know the meaning of the word." I stood there for an hour, snipping at the same bush, listening to the party swell. They were drinking my wine. They were walking on my floors. They were celebrating a future built on a crime. Around 1 a group of men drifted out onto the front porch to smoke cigars. I recognized one of them. It was the appraiser from the other day. But he wasn't acting like an appraiser now, he was acting like a buddy. He clapped Toby on the back. "Nice spread, Stone. I see why you wanted to fast-track that equity loan. This place is a gold mine." Toby laughed, but it sounded nervous. "Yeah, well, you know how it is. Liquid assets are king. I have some big investments lining up next week. Crypto is about to bounce back hard." I nearly snipped my own finger. He was already planning to dump the stolen money back into the same hole that swallowed the first $300,000. He hadn't learned a thing. He was an addict. And another man spoke up. He was wearing a pink polo shirt and looked like he had never done a day of manual labor in his life. "So, Toby, where is the patriarch? I heard your dad was in construction or something. Is he really in France? I wanted to ask him about the market in Europe." I froze. I stopped snipping. I adjusted the volume on my phone, needing to hear every nuance of this answer. Toby hesitated. I could picture him shifting his weight, glancing back at the house to make sure Brittany wasn't watching. "Yeah," Toby said, his voice smooth as oil. "He is in Provence right now. He bought a vineyard. Retired life, you know, he barely answers his phone anymore. He is living the dream." The men murmured in appreciation. "Impressive. A vineyard." Then the man in the pink shirt pointed a thumb in my direction. He didn't lower his voice. He didn't think he needed to. "So who is the old guy over there? The one butchering the hedges?" Toby looked at me. I could feel his gaze on the back of my neck. I kept my head down, snipping at the air. "Oh, him," Toby said, and I heard the sneer in his voice. "That is just the help. Some local guy we hired out of pity. He's not all there, if you know what I mean. A little senile. We just let him putter around so he feels useful. He is harmless. Just ignore him." The help hired out of pity. Harmless. The words hit me harder than the rain hat the night I found the lock. My son didn't just want my money. He was ashamed of me. He was ashamed of the calluses on my hands that paid for his college degree. He was ashamed of the sweat that built the walls he was leaning against. He had turned me into a caricature to impress a bunch of strangers who wouldn't care if he lived or died. I tightened my grip on the shears. Harmless. I looked at my watch. It was 1:15. Mr. Higgins was late. But just as the despair started to creep in, just as I started to wonder if my plan was too bold, I saw a car turn the corner. It wasn't a Range Rover. It wasn't a Tesla. It was a pristine vintage Lincoln Town car, black as midnight. It glided down the street like a shark in dark water. It pulled up right in front of the gate blocking the driveway. The driver's door opened. Arthur Higgins stepped out. He was wearing a 3-piece charcoal suit that looked like it belonged in a courtroom from 1950. He held a leather briefcase in one hand and a cane in the other. He didn't look like a party guest. He looked like the wrath of God in pinstripes. He walked up to me. He stopped and looked me up and down, taking in the stained coveralls and the straw hat. His eyes narrowed. He didn't say a word, but I saw the fury flash behind his spectacles. He tipped his hat to me, a gesture of respect from one professional to another. Then, He walked past me up the driveway toward the porch where Toby and his friends were smoking. I dropped the shears. They clattered onto the pavement. I took off the straw hat and tossed it onto the grass. I unzipped the coveralls. Underneath, I was wearing my best suit, the one I wore to my wife's funeral, the one I wore when I felt the most dignified. I straightened my tie. I smoothed my jacket. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the Bluetooth earbud. I didn't need to listen anymore. I was done being the audience. It was time to take the stage. I followed Higgins up the driveway. I walked with my head high. I walked like the man who owned the concrete beneath my feet. Toby saw Higgins first. His smile faltered. He looked confused. Then he saw me walking behind the lawyer, no longer the gardener, no longer the senile old man. His eyes widened. The cigar fell from his fingers and rolled across the porch. "Dad," he stammered. "What? What are you doing?" I didn't stop. I walked right past him, pushing open the front door. The blast of air conditioning and chatter hit me. I walked into the living room. Brittany was in the center of a circle of women holding up a tiny onesie. I marched over to the stereo system in the corner. I yanked the cord out of the wall. The music died with a screech. The room went silent. 50 heads turned to look at me. Brittany dropped the onesie. "Garrett," she hissed. "What do you think you were doing? Get back outside." I looked at her. I looked at the crowd. I saw the shock on their faces. "I am not the gardener," I said, my voice filling the room. "I am the landlord, and the rent is past due." The silence in the room was heavier than the humid air before a thunderstorm. 50 pairs of eyes were fixed on me. The man in the charcoal suit standing next to the dead stereo system. I could see the confusion rippling through the crowd. These were people who lived their lives through filters and carefully curated captions. They did not know how to process raw, unedited reality. Brittany recovered first. She always did. She was a professional at spinning narratives. She handed the onesie to a friend and plastered a tight, terrified smile on her face. She stepped toward me, her hands raised in a placating gesture, like she was approaching a wild animal she intended to tranquilize. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice pitching too high. "I am so sorry for the interruption. As you can see, my father-in-law has returned from his travels, but he is clearly exhausted. The jet lag can be terrible at his age." She reached me and dug her nails into my arm, leaning close so only I could hear. "Get out," she hissed. "Get out right now, or I swear to God I will have the police drag you out. You are ruining everything." I looked down at her hand on my sleeve. I looked at her perfectly manicured nails digging into the fabric of the suit I had worn to bury my wife. I felt a calm detachment settle over me. It was the same feeling I used to get right before I swung a sledgehammer into a wall that needed to come down. I gently removed her hand from my arm. I did not shove her. I did not squeeze. I just peeled her fingers off me like they were dead leaves. "I am not jet-lagged." "Brittany," I said, my voice steady enough to carry to the back of the room. "And I am certainly not confused." Toby pushed his way through the crowd. He looked like a man who was watching a car crash in slow motion. He saw Mr. Higgins standing by the door, the silent sentinel in the pinstripe suit. And I saw the color drain from his face. He knew who Higgins was. He knew that Higgins didn't go to parties. He went to funerals and courtrooms. "Dad, please," Toby begged, his voice cracking. "Let's just go to the kitchen. Let's talk about this privately. We can fix this." "Fix it?" I asked. "Like you fixed my workshop. Like you fixed the deed." I walked past him. I walked toward the front of the room where a large projector screen had been set up. It was currently displaying a slideshow of ultrasound photos set to a loop of lullaby music. Beside the screen was a small table with a microphone and a laptop. This was Britney's stage. She had set it up for her grand unboxing, where she would open gifts on a live stream for her 5,000 followers. I stepped onto the small riser. The floorboards creaked under my weight. I picked up the microphone. It was heavy, wireless professional quality. They had spared no expense with my money. Britney lunged forward, cut the feed. She screamed at the teenage girl holding a ring light and a smartphone. Stop filming. But the girl was too slow or maybe too captivated by the drama. She kept the camera rolling. I tapped the microphone. The sound thumped through the speakers, making a few guests jump. "Good afternoon," I said. The room went quiet again. Even Britney stopped moving, realizing that making a scene now would only make the live stream worse. She stood there vibrating with rage, her eyes promising retribution. For those of you who do not know me, I continued my eyes scanning the room. My name is Garrett Stone. I am not the gardener. I am not the help. And I am definitely not a wine tycoon living in the south of France. I saw the man in the pink polo shirt, the one who had called me harmless, shrink back into the crowd. He looked embarrassed. "Good. I am a carpenter," I said. "I built the floor you are standing on. I framed these walls. I shingled this roof. This is my home." I looked at Toby. He was leaning against the wall, holding his head in his hands. "My son and his wife told you I was away. They told you I was senile. They told you I was a burden. They did this because it is easier to steal from a ghost than it is to steal from a man who is standing right in front of you." "Garrett, stop it!" Britney shouted. She was crying now. Tears of pure frustration ruining her makeup. "He is having an episode. Someone call an ambulance. He is confused. He doesn't know what he is saying." I raised my left hand. The light from the chandelier caught the gold watch on my wrist. It was a simple watch engraved on the back. "Forever, Martha." "I know exactly what I am saying," I said, "and I know exactly what day it is. It is the day you decided to throw me away." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I walked over to the laptop sitting on the table. The cable connecting it to the projector was right there, an HDMI cord. I unplugged the laptop. The ultrasound photos vanished from the screen behind me, replaced by a stark blue no-signal message. "You wanted to unbox some gifts," I said to Britney. "You wanted to show the world what you have. Well, I have a gift for you too." I plugged the cable into my phone. Britney realized what was happening. Her eyes went wide. She scrambled toward the stage. "Toby, stop him. He is going to ruin us." Toby pushed off the wall. He took a step toward me. His face twisted in panic. "Dad, don't. Whatever it is, don't." Mr. Higgins stepped forward. He didn't shout. He just slammed the heavy end of his cane onto the floor. It sounded like a gavel. "Sit down, son," Higgins rumbled. "Unless you want to add assault to your list of felonies." Toby froze. He looked at Higgins, then at me. He saw the resolve in my eyes. He saw that the father who used to fix his scraped knees and pay his debts was gone. In his place was a stranger made of concrete and steel. He stopped. I tapped the screen on my phone. "I have a movie for you." All I said into the microphone. "It is a home movie. Very candid. I think you will find it illuminating." I hit play. The screen behind me flickered to life. It wasn't high-definition art. It was the grainy, stark footage from the camera I had hidden on top of the refrigerator. The date stamp in the corner was from 3 nights ago. The audio boomed through the speakers, loud and clear. "So here is the plan," Britney's recorded voice said. It echoed in the silent living room, a ghostly narration of her own cruelty. "Monday is the baby shower. We keep him in the basement all day. Tell the guests he is away on a cruise." The guests in the room gasped. A woman in the front row covered her mouth with her hand. Britney stood frozen, staring at her own image on the giant screen. And then Toby's recorded voice asked, "Then when the last guest leaves around 6 Summers p.m., we call 911. I watched the crowd. I watched their faces change from confusion to horror. They were watching a conspiracy. They were watching a young, beautiful couple plot to dispose of an old man like he was trash. We tell them he became violent. The recording continued. We say he is having a psychotic break. The ambulance comes. They sedate him, transfer him directly to the secure ward at Sunny Meadows. On the screen, Brittany laughed. It was a cold, ugly sound. Once he is in the system with a dementia diagnosis, nobody is going to listen to a word he says about forged deeds or stolen tools. I paused the video right there. I froze the image on Brittany's smiling, triumphant face. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens when a mask is ripped off and the monster underneath is revealed. I looked at Brittany. She wasn't crying anymore. She was pale, shaking, looking around the room for an ally, for someone to tell her this wasn't happening. But no one looked her in the eye. Her friends, her followers, the people she had pined for, they were all looking at me. I looked at Toby. He had slid down the wall and was sitting on the floor, his head between his knees. I turned back to the microphone. "There is no nursery," I said softly. "There is no renovation budget. There is only a son who stole his father's tools to pay a gambling debt, and a daughter-in-law who forged a deed to steal a house she didn't earn." I pointed to the door. "This party is over." The video on the screen did not stop. It continued to play, dragging the ugly truth out into the light for everyone to see. The grainy footage shifted to another angle, this one from the camera I had placed in the workshop loft. It showed Toby standing over a workbench, but he wasn't building anything. He was practicing signatures on a piece of scrap paper. I watched myself, or rather the digital ghost of my son, holding a pen with a shaking hand. "Keep it steady." Brittany's voice cut through the speakers. "Make the loop on the G bigger. It has to look exactly like the birthday card." "I can't believe we are doing this," Toby mumbled on the screen. "This is a felony, Brit." "If the bank finds out, they won't find out," Brittany snapped, walking into the frame. She was holding a paint swatch, deciding on colors for the room she was stealing. "Just trace it. Once the deed is recorded, the house is ours. We pull the equity pay off your debt, and then we deal with Garrett." The video cut again back to the kitchen scene. Brittany was pouring wine. "We sell the tools first," she said casually. "That covers the immediate interest. Then once the loan clears on Tuesday, we move him. I already printed the forms for Sunny Meadows. I marked the box for advanced dementia. It gives us power of attorney over his remaining accounts." Toby looked at her. "What if he fights back?" Brittany laughed, taking a sip of wine. "He is 70. Toby, he is tired. He is grieving. And after Monday, he will be sedated. He won't fight anyone. He will just fade away." The screen went black. The only sound in the room was the hum of the projector fan and the collective intake of breath from 50 people who had just witnessed a moral execution. I looked out at the sea of faces. The influencers were still holding their phones up, but they weren't smiling anymore. They were live streaming a crime scene. The comments section must have been exploding. Brittany's perfect life, her curated aesthetic, was dissolving in real time. Brittany let out a scream that sounded like an animal caught in a trap. She lunged for the table, her eyes wild. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the phone, at the source of her destruction. "Turn it off!" she shrieked. "Turn it off right now, you old!" She reached for the HDMI cable, her fingers clawing at the air, but she never made it. Arthur Higgins stepped in front of the table. He didn't raise his cane. He didn't even raise his voice. He just stood there, a solid wall of granite in a charcoal suit. He caught Brittany's wrist in midair. He held it firmly, not hurting her, but stopping her cold. "I would not do that," Mrs. Stonehig said. His voice was calm, deep, and terrifying. Tampering with evidence is another charge you really cannot afford right now. Brittany tried to pull away, but Higgins held fast. "Let go of me," she spat. "This is my house. You are trespassing." Higgins released her with a small shove. She stumbled back, almost tripping over her own long dress. She looked around the room searching for support for anyone to take her side, but the guests were backing away. They were creating a circle of empty space around her, and Toby distancing themselves from the stench of the scandal. I stepped down from the riser. I walked toward Toby. He was still on the floor, but he looked up now. His face was wet with tears. "Why, Dad?" he whispered. "Why did you do it like this? Why didn't you just stop me?" "Because you needed to see yourself," I said. "You needed to see what you became." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the manila envelope Higgins had prepared. I tossed it onto the floor in front of Toby. It landed with a heavy slap. "You wanted this house, Toby," I said. "You were willing to forge my name to get it. You were willing to lock me away to keep it. But here is the punchline, son. Here is the joke." I pointed at the envelope. "You forged a signature on a quit-claim deed to transfer the title from Garrett Stone to Toby Stone. But Garrett Stone does not own this house." Toby blinked, confusion cutting through his panic. "What I set this house, the land, and every asset I own into the Stone family irrevocable trust 10 years ago," I said. My voice was loud, addressing the room as much as him. "I did it to protect my family, to protect you from yourself." I looked at Higgins. He nodded. "The legal owner of this property is the trust," I continued, "and the trustee is Mr. Higgins. When you forged my name, you forged the signature of a beneficiary, not the owner. That deed you filed, the one you used to apply for that loan. It is worthless. It is a piece of trash. You tried to steal a car that had no engine." Toby stared at me. His mouth opened and closed. "You mean the loan?" "The loan was never going to fund Toby." I said, "The bank knows. The title company knows. Everyone knows. You were never going to get that money. You were just digging your grave deeper and deeper." Brittany stepped up beside Toby. Her face was a mask of fury. "So what?" she yelled. "So the deed is bad. Fine. We live here. We have tenant rights. You can't just kick a pregnant woman out on the street. We will fight you. We will stay right here until the baby is born." I shook my head. I looked at her with pity. "You really didn't read the trust documents, did you, Brittany?" "Of course not." "You never read anything that didn't have a price tag on it." I gestured to Higgins. "Higgins, please explain Clause 14 to my daughter-in-law." Higgins cleared his throat. He didn't need to look at the papers. He knew the law by heart. Clause 14. Section B, regarding the conduct of beneficiaries and residents. Higgins recited, "Any act of physical, emotional, or financial abuse directed toward the primary beneficiary, that being Mr. Garrett Stone, by any resident of the trust property, constitutes an immediate breach of the residency agreement. Such breach triggers an automatic and immediate revocation of all living privileges." He looked at Brittany over the rim of his glasses. "In plain English, Mrs. Stone, it means that by plotting to commit Mr. Stone to a mental institution under false pretenses, and by liquidating assets belonging to the trust, specifically the workshop machinery, you have forfeited your right to be here. This is not an eviction process that takes months. This is a trespassing order that takes effect the moment the abuse is verified. And we just verified it." I added, pointing to the blank screen in 4K resolution. Brittany looked around the room. The guests were whispering. Some were already heading for the door, eager to escape the fallout. "You can't do this," she screamed. I have a baby coming. Then you should have thought about that before you tried to destroy the man who put the roof over that baby's head, I said. Just then a sound cut through the murmuring of the crowd. It was a sound I'd been expecting, a sound I had dreaded but also welcomed. Sirens. They started low and distant, then grew louder, wailing up the quiet suburban street. Blue and red lights flashed against the living room windows, washing the pastel decorations in harsh, strobing colors. Toby scrambled to his feet. He looked at the window, then at me. "Dad," he said, his voice trembling. "Dad, tell me you didn't." "I didn't call them Toby," I said softly. "The bank did." The front door burst open. 3 police officers walked in. They looked serious. They looked like men who had seen the evidence and knew exactly who they were looking for. One of them stepped forward. He spotted Toby immediately. "Toby Stone." He set his hand resting on his belt. Toby stepped back, bumping into the table with the macaron tower. It wobbled and crashed to the floor, spilling expensive cookies everywhere. "Yes," Toby squeaked. "Toby Stone, you are under arrest for bank fraud, forgery of a legal instrument, and elder abuse." "Put your hands behind your back," Brittany screamed. It was a raw, primal sound. "No, you can't take him. We have plans. We have money coming." The officer ignored her. He spun Toby around and slapped the cuffs on him. The metal clicked shut. It was a final decisive sound, the sound of a door closing on a future that never existed. Toby looked over his shoulder at me as they marched him toward the door. He was crying openly now. "Dad, help me," he sobbed. "Please, I am your son." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had sold my legacy for $5,000. I looked at the man who had planned to drug me and lock me away. I stepped closer to him. I leaned in so only he could hear. "You were my son, Toby," I whispered. "Now you are just a man who learned that the price of betrayal is higher than any loan you can get." I watched them drag him out the door into the flashing lights. Brittany was running after them, screaming at the police, screaming at me, screaming at the world that had finally told her no. I stood alone in the center of the ruined party. The guests were fleeing like rats from a sinking ship. The music was gone. The lies were gone. And for the first time in months, the air in my own house felt clean. The handcuffs clicked with a sound of finality that echoed off the walls of the house I built. Toby was weeping now, loud, ugly sobs that shook his whole body. He looked like a child who had broken a window, not a grown man who had tried to defraud a bank and imprison his father. "Dad, please," he wailed, twisting his head around as the officer guided him toward the door. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I was scared. The debt, they were going to hurt me. You have to help me. You always help me." I watched him. I watched the boy I had taught to ride a bike, the young man I had bailed out of college debt, the adult I had let live in my home. I saw the fear in his eyes, but I also saw the lack of responsibility. Even now in cuffs, he was blaming the debt, the fear, the situation. He wasn't blaming himself. "I did help you, Toby," I said, my voice heavy with a sadness I knew would never fully leave me. "I gave you a home. I gave you a start. I gave you every chance to be a man of honor, but you chose the easy way. You chose to steal. You chose to lie. And when that wasn't enough, you chose to throw me away like garbage." I stepped closer, ignoring the police officer who tensed slightly. I needed my son to hear this. "I'm not helping you out of this one," I said softly. "This is a lesson I cannot pay for. You have to buy this one with your own time." Toby slumped, defeated. The officer pushed him forward and he disappeared out the front door into the flashing red and blue lights. Brittany was next. She wasn't in cuffs yet, but a female officer was holding her arm firmly. Brittany wasn't crying. She was screaming. She was spitting venom, her face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. "This is all him," she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at the open door where Toby had vanished. I didn't sign anything. I didn't know about the loan. You can't touch me. I am pregnant. You are stressing the baby. Mr. Higgins stepped into her path. He looked at the officer. Officer Higgins said calmly, Mrs. Stone admitted on a recorded video to facilitating the liquidation of assets belonging to the trust, specifically industrial machinery, valued at $80,000. She also conspired to file a false police report regarding a mental health crisis. We will be pressing charges for grand larceny and conspiracy. The officer nodded. Ma'am, we're going to need you to come down to the station for a statement. No, Brittany screamed. My party, my baby shower. You old dinosaur. You ruined my life. She lunged at me, but the officer held her back. I didn't flinch. I just looked at her. You ruined your own life, Brittany? I said, you wanted a nursery so bad you tore down a man's livelihood to build it. Now you don't have a nursery. You don't have a house. And you don't have a husband to pay for your mistakes. They led her out. Her screams faded as the door closed, leaving a ringing silence in the living room. The guests were gone. They had scattered like cockroaches the moment the police arrived, terrified of being associated with a scandal. The room was a wreckage of pastel decorations. The macaron tower lay shattered on the floor, pink and yellow crumbs ground into the expensive rug. The banner that said Baby Stone hung crookedly from one corner. I stood alone in the center of the ruin. I felt old. I felt tired. But for the first time in months, I didn't feel heavy. The weight of the secret, the weight of the fear, it was all gone. Mr. Higgins walked over to me. He placed a hand on my shoulder. It is done, Garrett, he said quietly. I will handle the arraignment. I will handle the eviction notice. You won't have to see them again until the trial. Thank you, Arthur, I said, for everything. He nodded and walked out to his Lincoln, leaving me alone in my house. My real house, not the basement, not a cell. I looked around at the sage green paint swatches Brittany had taped to the walls. I walked over and ripped them down. I crumbled them in my hand and dropped them on the floor. It was time to clean up. 1 week later, the air was crisp and clean. The rain had stopped and the sun was filtering through the trees in the backyard. I stood in the doorway of my workshop. It looked different now. The smell of Brittany's cheap lavender air freshener was gone, scrubbed away with bleach and hard work. The sage green paint was gone, covered by a fresh coat of bright, clean white. The laminate flooring she had stacked in the corner was in a dumpster. But the most important change was the noise. It wasn't silent anymore. A delivery truck was backing up the driveway, the reverse alarm beeping a steady rhythm. 2 men in blue uniforms jumped out and opened the back gate. Delivery for Garrett Stone, the driver called out. That is me, I said, stepping forward. They unloaded the first crate. It was heavy. It took both of them and a dolly to move it. They wheeled it into the shop and set it down exactly where the old rust stains used to be. I stripped away the cardboard packaging. Underneath was cast iron and gleaming steel. A new Powermatic table saw bigger than the old one. Better motor. Safety stop technology. Next came the bandsaw, then the planer, then the joiner. I spent the morning directing them, watching my shop fill up again. It wasn't just metal and motors. It was possibility. It was the future returning to the present. When the delivery men left, I stood in the center of the room. It smelled of packing grease and new rubber. It was a good smell, but it needed one more thing. I walked over to the new workbench I had built over the last 3 days. It was solid maple, thick and heavy. I opened a small wooden box that sat on the surface. Inside were my father's chisels. I had found them in the trunk of Toby's car before the tow truck took it away. He hadn't pawned them. He had forgotten them. They were the only things he hadn't managed to sell. Probably because he didn't know what they were worth. To him, they were just old rusty tools. To me, they were the Holy Grail. I took out the widest chisel. I felt the weight of it in my hand. The handle was familiar, welcoming. I picked up a piece of white oak I had selected from the lumberyard yesterday. I clamped it to the bench. I put on my leather apron. I tied the strings behind my back. I adjusted my safety glasses. I placed the edge of the chisel against the wood. I pushed. The steel sliced through the grain with a whispering sound, curling a long, perfect shaving of wood. The smell of cut oak rose up sharp and sweet. It filled the room, chasing away the ghosts of the last few months. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of sawdust. I was 70 years old. I was alone. My son was in jail. My daughter-in-law was facing charges. My bank account was bruised, though the trust was safe. But as I looked at the curl of wood on the bench, I realized I wasn't poor. I wasn't broken. I was a maker. I was a builder. And I still had work to do. I picked up the next piece of wood. I had a plan for this one. I wasn't building a crib. I wasn't building a renovation. I was going to build a rocking horse, a sturdy, beautiful rocking horse. And when it was done, I was going to donate it to the children's shelter downtown, and then I would build a toy chest and then a dollhouse. I would fill my days with creation, not destruction. I looked at the door of the workshop. It was wide open, letting in the sunlight and the breeze. There was no lock on it. There never would be again. I lost a son that week. It is true. I lost the illusion of a happy family. But standing there with the dust mows dancing in the light and the tools of my trade waiting for my hands, I realized I had found something much more important. I had found Garrett Stone again, and this time I wasn't going anywhere. My story is a bitter wake-up call. Sometimes blind love is the poison that feeds greed. I made the mistake of thinking that silent sacrifice would earn respect. But Toby and Brittany taught me that when morality is obscured by dollar signs, even your own blood can become your most ruthless enemy. However, the most important lesson I learned is that it is never too late to rebuild. A man's true worth is not found in the assets he hoards, but in the courage to defend his own dignity. Sometimes the greatest act of love is forcing your children to face the consequences of their own actions. What do you think about my final move? Was I too harsh on my son and his pregnant wife? Or did they earn every bit of that lesson? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe to follow the next story. Thanks for listening.